Everything falls apart at the very moment you least expect it. A single laugh, one phrase, overheard through a half-closed door, and suddenly your entire world, familiar, safe, family-bound, lays bare like an exposed wire, ready to burn everything it touches. She's the one you came back to life for, the mother of your children, the light in your darkest days. And now you're standing by the door, hearing her voice, tender, giggling, unfamiliar. And it's not panic that ignites in your mind, but a cold, sharp clarity. Something is wrong. Something has been rotting quietly for a long time. You still hope it's a misunderstanding, that everything will make sense, but your heart already knows. There's no going back. Your hands remember the heat of Vietnam's jungles. Your eyes remember the face of a fallen friend. You survived there only to die here, in the silence of your own basement, under the weight of suspicion, in the house you built with your own hands. But when the past comes alive, when the demons of war awaken once again, no one walks away unchanged. Not her, not you, not anyone who dares stand in between. What does a man do when he's lost everything but his dignity? What remains when the truth surfaces, tearing lives apart? And in the end, who is the real traitor, the one who went off to war or the one who stayed behind? Greetings, my dear viewer. Please, tell me which city and country you're watching this video from. Maybe you're watching me from a small town or a gigantic metropolis. Write about it. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and share this video with your friends. It will make me very happy. Let's get started. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, where the vast expanse of fields stretched endlessly and the community was close-knit. My childhood was a blend of typical days mixed with extraordinary dreams. Though my parents weren't affluent, they instilled in me the importance of hard work and determination. My father, a veteran, often shared tales of perseverance, while my mother was the steady anchor that kept our family together. It was during my high school years that I began to truly discover who I was. I had a natural talent for math and science, which fueled my dream of becoming an engineer. My best friend James and I spent countless hours drawing up plans for imaginary inventions and discussing our futures. He was the one who thrived on adventure, always seeking new challenges, while I found comfort in structure and well-defined goals. After high school, our paths diverged. James enlisted in the military, while I went off to college to study engineering. However, financial challenges and some youthful missteps led me to a turning point, and I eventually followed James's lead and joined the military. The military was a crucible that transformed me. It strengthened me, but it also made me more reserved. When I returned home, I was no longer the person I had been. The innocence of youth had given way to the weight of experience. I shifted my focus back to education and eventually landed a job at GM, where I met Samantha. She brought warmth into my life, filling the emptiness that had taken root over the years. Samantha and I built a life together, creating a home and a family, something I believed would always remain solid. Slowly, I began to feel a sense of awareness creeping back, as though I were emerging from a fog. The faint light seeping through the basement door mirrored my own mental state. I could hear our younger children playing in the rec room, absorbed in a Disney movie. I sat in my old chair, glancing at the clock. I had been lost in thought for over half an hour, trying to block out thoughts I wasn't ready to face. Dinner had finished, and while Samantha cleaned up, I retreated to the basement to re-glue some rackets for the upcoming racquetball league. I had been playing in the A bracket for years, and I took great pride in my skill and fitness. Standing 6'2" and weighing around 200 pounds, I kept in good shape despite the demands of my engineering job at GM. Our 7-year-old daughter, Jillian, followed me downstairs, intending to watch a movie with her younger sister, Amelia. At this age, Amelia was always attached to Jillian. I often wondered how things would change as Jillian got older. Our 9-year-old son, Joshua, the oldest, often retreated to his room to build model airplanes. I finished adjusting the handles on 3 rackets, tightening the strings in preparation for any breaks during a game. After checking on the girls, who were absorbed in Lady and the Tramp, I decided to head upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I overheard Samantha speaking on the phone. For a moment, I entertained the idea of surprising her and setting a romantic tone for later, even though we had already shared some time together that morning. But when I peered through the door, I heard Samantha laughing. I froze. That laugh was familiar, but it felt unsettling. Then I heard her whisper, "Sure would like to try that thing again before the wart comes off." The odd comment instantly brought back memories of a conversation I had with some friends at a bar a few months ago. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I collapsed onto the basement stairs, quietly shutting the door behind me. Samantha's laughter continued, her voice lowering in pitch. I could catch only snippets of her words. Last time, I was really on a roll. I can't wait. Trying not to be noticed, I quietly retreated to my workshop, my mind spinning. The conversation reminded me of a night out with Jacob and Caleb after a racquetball match. We had been discussing the game, but the topic quickly shifted to women. I noticed Jacob and Caleb seemed oddly curious about my marriage. Although they weren't overtly flirting, their probing questions made me uncomfortable, so I began leaving early to avoid the topic. On one of those occasions, Caleb had been teasing Jacob about his wife, Melissa, joking that Jacob needed some personal surgery. I assumed he was talking about a vasectomy, and I mentioned that Samantha had suggested I consider it, though we hadn't made a decision. Caleb had smirked, while Jacob appeared embarrassed. "Oh no, she wants him to remove the wart," Caleb had laughed. I was confused. "What's going on?" I asked. Jacob blushed and explained that he had a wart in a private area which had grown over the years. His wife, Melissa, wanted it removed, but Jacob wasn't worried about the cost. He was more concerned about losing his appeal with other women, as the wart had become a point of interest. Realizing I was uncomfortable with their conversation, I decided to leave. Now, sitting in the basement in the dark, I couldn't believe that Samantha might be involved in something like what I had overheard. Samantha knew Jacob and Caleb from racquetball, but I never thought they'd be acquainted with her. As the pieces began to fall into place, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I broke into a cold sweat, hoping there was some reasonable explanation. But then there was Diana, Samantha's boss. Diana had been with the company for 5 years and had become close friends with Samantha. The two had bonded when they were both pregnant, and over time, our families had socialized a few times, though we weren't particularly close. Jacob and Caleb had joined the Wise Racquetball League a couple of years ago. Despite having similar family situations, we only interacted at games or afterward over beers, never with our families. It wasn't until recently, when I mentioned the store where Samantha worked, that I discovered Diana knew Jacob and Caleb. They had gone to high school together, and Jacob had mentioned seeing each other once or twice a year. About 2 years ago, when Amelia was going through the terrible twos, Samantha had been struggling. Jillian went to daycare, and I was working extra hours at my job. One evening, Samantha broke down from exhaustion. After comforting her, I offered to take full responsibility for the kids on her next day off so she could get some rest. She thanked me and said she would think about it. A couple of weeks after their conversation, Samantha revealed her intention to discuss taking some time away with Diana. Diana suggested a shopping trip to the upscale malls in Detroit. Despite some reservations, I agreed to the idea. Early on a Saturday morning, Samantha and Diana headed out. They checked into a motel, had a nice dinner, and then went to the movies. I made sure to note the motel details, which Samantha provided without hesitation. The next day, they checked out, visited another mall, and returned home by 5 p.m. Samantha was clearly happy about the trip and gave me a warm hug as soon as she walked in, eager to recount all the details. She hadn't gone overboard with spending, but she had picked up a few things for herself and the kids. I was glad she had a good time, and the kids had been well behaved, so there were no complaints on my end. That was more than 2 years ago, and since then, these shopping trips with Diana had become a regular occurrence. Every few months, they'd leave early on a Saturday and come back late Sunday. I didn't mind much, enjoying the time with the kids, and Samantha seemed content. At first, everything seemed normal, but after their second trip, Samantha returned with a noticeably different mood, distant and a bit off. When I asked her about it, she dismissed it as just being related to the start of her period. Reflecting on it now, I realized that since those trips began, we hadn't been intimate on the nights she returned, even though we always were a few days before she left. I hadn't given it much thought until now. From upstairs, Samantha called down to me, "Patrick, it's bath time for the girls. Could you send them up?" I let out a sigh, a growing unease creeping over me as I made my way upstairs to gather the girls. I did my best to stay calm, but the feeling was hard to shake. When I came back downstairs, Samantha was in the kitchen flipping through a cookbook. She gave me a warm smile, met my eyes, and asked, "Is something wrong, honey?" I muttered something about a broken racket, but kept my gaze on her, looking for any signs. She seemed perfectly fine, just like my wife, Samantha. She kissed me and casually mentioned that Diana had called to plan another shopping trip. When she said this, I noticed her eyes narrow and her quick glance away, which struck me as odd. It made me wonder just how long this had been going on. I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. "Do we have anything on the calendar for next weekend?" I asked. She replied that there was nothing planned. I suggested attending a VFW event on Saturday, but she wasn't interested. "I don't care if your dad goes," she said. "I'm not going." "It bores me to death," I replied. I pushed a bit further, suggesting a family trip to Cedar Point, but Samantha became defensive. "We just took the kids to Mackinac Island." "What's gotten into you, Patrick?" she said, her tone sharp. "You've never minded me shopping before," I said, frustration building. Finally, I let it go, muttering, "Never mind. I just thought we could do something together." She walked away, saying, "You and Diana are having fun. I'll go check on the kids." That night, I pretended to be asleep, but my mind was racing. I heard Samantha come to bed and whisper my name, but I stayed still. Eventually, she turned away, and I lay there, replaying everything in my head. My thoughts wandered back to my childhood, just a few miles from where we live now. I had a typical middle-class upbringing with my parents and older sister. My best friend, James, lived just a block away, and we were inseparable. He was the outgoing, life-of-the-party type, while I was quieter, more introspective. We spent our time playing sports, chasing girls, and, in the end, both lost our virginity before prom. In high school, I took drafting classes and decided I wanted to become an engineer. James wasn't sure what he wanted to do, but we both enrolled in community college. After my first year, I made a huge mistake. I got arrested for drunk driving after a party and spent the night in jail. My parents bailed me out, and they were furious. I spent all my savings on fines, court fees, and lost my driver's license for a year. For the remainder of the semester, I rode my moped, giving James rides. Eventually, I dropped out of school. It seemed pointless without a license or money. The next year, I enlisted in the Army, hoping that my drafting skills might land me an engineering job and keep me out of Vietnam. The recruiter lied, of course. James decided to join me, and we enlisted together, with the promise of training side by side. Basic training was tough, but manageable. During aptitude tests, the Army decided we'd be good fire control specialists, meaning we'd use high-tech calculators to help artillery hit targets. Afterward, we were sent to Fort Sill for further training. It wasn't glamorous, but James and I managed to have some fun. A few weeks before graduation, we received orders for Vietnam. After a brief break at home, we flew to I Corps, where we were assigned to Battery A, 2nd Battalion, 11th Artillery. It was November 1969, and President Nixon was reducing troop numbers. For the first few months, there wasn't much combat, just a lot of flying and some occasional raids. The highlight of our time there was a wild vacation in Bangkok. Soon after, our unit was sent to a remote hill in the jungle, and things took a darker turn. 4 months later, I returned home on a stretcher, and James was dead. I was both mentally and physically broken. I spent weeks in the hospital and months in rehab. When I was almost fit for duty again, I returned to Fort Sill as an assistant instructor. I enrolled in college courses to stay occupied, avoiding social interactions as much as I could. After a year, I applied for an early release from the Army and was accepted into an engineering program at a local university. I moved back in with my parents, living off savings, education benefits, and a part-time job. I became a classic shell-shocked Vietnam vet, bitter, withdrawn, and haunted by my experiences. I grew a beard, wore old clothes, and kept to myself. I sometimes visited a therapist, but the sessions never seemed to help me much. Instead, I spent most of my time talking to James's parents about him. It was the least I could do for them. One afternoon, while I was studying in the campus center, a woman approached me and asked if she could sit next to me. She had striking red hair and pale skin. Her appearance immediately drew my attention, but when she asked if I was a veteran of the Vietnam War, I froze for a moment. I answered her question affirmatively, but didn't elaborate further. She mentioned that her father had served in the Korean War, which made me feel a bit more at ease. We exchanged a few words before she had to leave for class. A couple of days later, she returned and asked if she could join me again. This time, I felt more relaxed, and we talked as if we had known each other for years. Eventually, she realized she hadn't asked my name, so I introduced myself. "Patrick Reynolds," I said. "Samantha Barnes," she replied with a laugh. And just like that, I met Samantha. Samantha and I discovered we both had long breaks between classes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Over the next few weeks, we spent most of those breaks together. She opened up about almost every aspect of her life, her family, friends, and career ambitions, and I was drawn in by her lively, outgoing personality. She reminded me so much of James. I shared a bit about my family and my classes, but I made a point of not discussing my time in the military. I found myself enjoying listening to her talk. She could have recited the phone book, and I would have hung on every word. Gradually, I began taking better care of myself, shaving more often, getting regular haircuts, and dressing more neatly. My mom noticed and teased me about it, but she seemed genuinely pleased with the changes. A few weeks later, I finally worked up the courage to ask her out. She agreed without hesitation, but warned me, "My dad can be tough on guys who ask me out." I responded, "If being with you means dealing with your dad, then it's worth it." She blushed and called me a flatterer. That Friday, I knocked on her door, and her mother, Evelyn, greeted me with a warm smile. Before I could speak, she called out, "Jonathan, Samantha's date is here." Evelyn introduced herself, and we shook hands. A few moments later, Samantha's father, Jonathan, appeared. He was about my height but much larger, and his presence was imposing. He shook my hand firmly and invited me into the living room. As we sat down, I noticed various military memorabilia on the walls, including a Marine Corps flag and an M1 Garand rifle proudly displayed above the fireplace. Jonathan, a veteran of the Korean War, began talking about his service and the injuries he had sustained. I briefly mentioned that I was a Vietnam War veteran, but when the conversation turned to military history, Jonathan seemed skeptical and dismissive of my experience. He muttered something about Vietnamization and the end of the war, but Evelyn quickly changed the subject to something more neutral. When Samantha joined us, we shifted the conversation to school. After a while, we said our goodbyes, and I took Samantha out to dinner and a movie. The evening was a bit of a blur as I was completely focused on her. We held hands, sitting so close that our heads nearly touched. Afterward, we stopped by a bar for a drink, and I walked her to her door. I hesitated, unsure whether to kiss her, but she reached up, wrapped her arms around my neck, and whispered, "Thank you for a wonderful evening." Time seemed to stop as I looked into her eyes and realized I had fallen in love with her. I kissed her gently. From that moment on, we shared intimate moments, holding each other close and showing how we felt for one another. The following day, I called Samantha, and we talked for an hour. We quickly made plans for another date, and just like that, we became exclusive. A few weeks later, when I suggested booking a motel room for the weekend, she blushed but smiled and nodded. The weekend went as I had hoped, though there were a few awkward moments when she noticed the scars from my time in Vietnam. I reassured her that I was okay. I whispered, "Samantha, I love you. I can't help it." She pulled back, tears welling up in her eyes, and smiled. "I love you too, Patrick." "I never knew it could be like this," she said, and I kissed her nose, feeling a deep sense of relief. "I want to do this again and again," I murmured. That night was perfect. For the first time since losing James, I felt at peace. We talked about our future, marriage, children, and where we would live. Samantha was about to graduate, and I would follow a year later. We agreed that she would work after graduation, and we would marry once I finished school. In the meantime, I rented an apartment so we could spend more time together. A week later, I introduced Samantha to my parents. They immediately got along, and my mom later told me she loved Samantha for helping me come out of my shell. I was happy again, smiling all the time. So much so that my therapist told me I no longer needed his services and sent me on my way. Samantha's father, Jonathan, and I had a tense relationship, especially when it came to the subject of living together before marriage. But things changed when Jonathan invited me over for a private talk. After some small talk, Jonathan mentioned that Samantha had told him about my scars. I felt a bit uneasy, but Jonathan was understanding. We talked briefly about my time in Vietnam, and I mentioned that I had been at Ripcord in the summer of '70. To my surprise, Jonathan knew all about it. From then on, Jonathan treated me like family. Things moved quickly after that. Samantha graduated with honors, landed a job, and spent even more time with me. Her parents, however, thought it was time for her to move in with me permanently. I graduated on time, started working at General Motors, and 2 months later, Samantha and I got married. We acquired a modest home, and a year later, our son Joshua was born. 2 years after him, Jillian joined the family, followed by Amelia 3 years later. The arrival of our children marked a new chapter in our lives. After Joshua's birth, Samantha decided to reduce her working hours, intending to return to full-time work when the kids were older. During that time, my career took a turn as I entered the burgeoning field of automated manufacturing. By the time Amelia arrived, I was collaborating with a team diving into the innovative world of computer-aided design systems. Life felt content. We were financially stable, owned 2 cars, and lived in a beautiful home. Over the years, we expanded the house with a new bedroom, a bathroom, and a recreational room. Our children flourished, and we made it a tradition to go on family vacations every year. Twice a year, Samantha and I sent the children to stay with their grandparents for a long weekend. I always believed our marriage was unshakable. We expressed our love openly, holding hands, hugging, and being affectionate. I often told Samantha how lucky I was to have her, but recently, doubts began to creep in. Sleep became increasingly elusive, and I found myself awake most nights, staring at the ceiling, restless and uneasy. I skipped my usual morning workout and sat at my desk, trying to make sense of what was wrong. I couldn't confront Samantha directly. If there was something she wasn't sharing, maybe she wasn't being truthful. I wasn't even certain of the truth, but there was an unsettling feeling that something was off. I loved Samantha and our children with all my heart. The thought of losing them was terrifying, but the fear that Samantha might no longer love me was even more unsettling. For days I felt disconnected and distracted, as though I was a mere shadow of myself. It wasn't until Joshua remarked on my odd behavior that Samantha started to notice. I brushed it off as stress from work. By Tuesday, I had returned to my regular routine and played racquetball with Jacob and Caleb, just as I always did. Jacob and Caleb were inseparable, and there was something about their closeness that began to unsettle me. They acted as though they shared a secret, and when they exchanged knowing glances, I began to see them as rivals. We played a few casual games, but my mind wasn't focused on the match. By Wednesday, I decided to investigate their plans. I called Jacob's house, and his wife told me he was at a business conference in Detroit. I called Caleb's house next, and received the same response. My heart sank. I didn't need confirmation. I already knew. I was certain they had met, but lingering questions remained. How far had it gone? A surge of anger washed over me. A voice inside urged me to take action. On Friday, I went to see my parents. They were caught up in renovations, preparing for a potential move to Florida, but I needed their support. After some small talk, I blurted it out. I think Samantha is cheating on me. The words hit me hard, and for the first time in a long while, I cried. My parents were stunned. Mom whispered, "No, not Samantha. She wouldn't do that to you." Dad asked, "Why do you think that?" I explained everything, what I had overheard, the things I had discovered. Mom began to weep quietly, and Dad comforted her, asking, "What do you need from us?" "I need to know for sure," I replied. "Can you take the kids tomorrow and keep them until Sunday?" I asked. "I have to be where she'll be tomorrow night." Dad hesitated, but then agreed. "Sure, Patrick. But I hope this is just a misunderstanding." "Yeah, me too," I said, though part of me wasn't convinced. I left, feeling hollow, unsure of what awaited me. When I got home, Samantha was in the kitchen, cheerfully finishing dinner. She greeted me with a warm hug and a kiss, saying, "The kids are in the break room. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. She seemed distracted, practically buzzing with energy. It hit me that we hadn't been intimate since the previous Saturday, and we had skipped our usual midweek routine. I had been in a foul mood all week, relying on sleeping pills to get through the days, and Samantha hadn't mentioned it once. I hesitated before suggesting, "How about we put the kids to bed early tonight and spend some time together?" Samantha stepped back, her smile faltering. "I got my period early today," she said, looking uneasy. I forced a smile. "Okay, I understand." She gently stroked my cheek, promising, "Once my period is over, I'll explain everything." I nodded, muttering, "Then it's a date." She hugged me before returning to her cooking. I slowly went upstairs, my anger simmering inside. I now knew she was holding herself back for whatever was planned for the following day. The voice inside my head grew louder, urging me to take action. At dinner, I struggled to keep my emotions in check. The kids chatted away, blissfully unaware. Could this be our last dinner together as a family? The thought brought tears to my eyes. The next day, we followed our usual Saturday routine. The kids cleaned their rooms before watching cartoons. I spent time in the garage until Samantha was ready to leave. She came downstairs with her suitcase, reminding the kids to behave while she was gone. Amelia clung to her, asking her to bring her something. Samantha promised, kissed Amelia goodbye, and left for the hotel. I watched her drive off, holding Amelia in my arms. Once she was out of sight, I turned to the kids and told them, "We're going to Grandma and Grandpa's house for the night." They quickly packed, and we left. At my parents' house, Dad gave me a concerned look. "Good luck, Patrick. I hope you're wrong." "I hope so too," I replied, feeling the weight of his words. "Thanks for everything. I'll call you tomorrow morning." I decided to switch cars at Avis, hoping to avoid being recognized. Once home, I sat down in the kitchen, replaying everything that had happened over the past few days. The phone rang around 1 a.m., piercing the quiet. It was Samantha. "Is that you, Patrick?" she asked. "Yeah, it's me. Everything all right?" I responded, a hint of sarcasm slipping into my voice. "We're fine," she answered. "We stopped for lunch, and we're in room 168. The number is 555-645-0168. She quickly added, "Diana's waving at me. We're heading to Meadowbrook Shopping Center for the afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow," I said, and the line disconnected without a farewell or an "I love you." Even this morning, she hadn't said it. I dialed the Red Roof Inn to confirm Samantha had checked in. I decided against calling her room just yet. I'd see her later. After hanging up, I dialed again, this time asking about Jacob Hunter. They confirmed his registration, but he hadn't checked in yet. I told them I'd call back later and hung up, my anger simmering beneath the surface. I walked to the workshop, unlocked the tool cabinet, and stood before my father's old rifle. For a moment, I thought about taking it with me, but the thought of never seeing my children again made me hesitate. Instead, I grabbed an old shoebox from the drawer and pulled out a sea knife I had bought in Bangkok. Strapping it to my calf, I packed a few essentials, driving gloves, water, candy bars, and set out at 2 p.m. for the 90-mile drive to Rochester Hills. When I arrived near the Red Roof Inn by room 168, Samantha's car was nowhere in sight. I waited, my mind consumed with thoughts of Samantha and the kids. Around 5 p.m., Jacob and Caleb pulled up in a red pickup truck, laughing as they unloaded bags. They headed into a nearby room, and after about 45 minutes, they left. I followed them to Tupper's Pub, parked on the street, and waited. Soon Samantha's car appeared, and I made sure I could keep an eye on both her car and the truck. I thought about going inside, but decided to stay in the car, letting country music match my mood. At 9 p.m., the four of them finally emerged, laughing and holding hands. I decided to beat them back to the hotel. After parking, I waited as they pulled in 10 minutes later. They gathered near the light by room 1, still talking and laughing. Jacob tossed a coin, and Caleb kissed Samantha. Diana grabbed Jacob's hand, and they scattered to different rooms, still laughing. My mind raced. Was this all just some twisted game? The pain in my chest flared, and a voice in my head screamed, "Do something." There was no undoing what had already happened. 10 years of marriage, a family, destroyed. What good would confronting them do? At least I would know the truth. Then, Jacob stepped out of Diana's room holding a beer, dressed only in boxer shorts. He strolled over to Samantha's room and knocked. A few minutes later, Caleb came out of Diana's room, shirtless and barefoot. They exchanged a few words before sharing a high five. Jacob entered Samantha's room, and Caleb returned to Diana's. That's when it hit me. I had completely lost control. A voice screamed inside me, "Do something now." Fury surged through me, unstoppable. Without thinking, I slipped on my driving gloves, got out of the car, and walked toward room 168. I covered the peephole with my thumb and knocked twice. As the door opened, Jacob's voice rang out, "What the hell, Caleb?" Without hesitation, I threw a punch, followed by a kick fueled by every ounce of my rage. Jacob staggered backward and crashed to the floor, his hands covering his face. I took in the chaos of the room, an overturned bed, the bathroom door ajar, the shower still running. I unsheathed the knife and tapped its blade against Jacob's nose. His eyes widened in terror. "How long, Jacob? How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my voice cold as ice. 2 years, he stammered, fear evident in his eyes. "Joining the same racquetball league wasn't a coincidence?" I pressed. "No," he whispered, his face filled with pain. I leaned in closer. "You're sick, Jacob. Look at me." I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words sink in. "If you ever go near Samantha or any other married woman again, I'll find you and make you regret it. Understand?" "Yes," he wheezed, panic evident in his voice. Just then, a foul odor hit the air. The shower stopped, and I heard Samantha's voice from the bathroom. "Hey, Jacob boy, I thought you were joining me in the shower." I turned just as Samantha appeared in the bathroom doorway, towel in hand. Her face drained of color when she saw me. Shock took over, and her towel slipped to the floor. "Jacob boy doesn't seem well," I growled, taking a step toward her. Panic flashed in her eyes as she slammed the bathroom door shut. I moved quickly towards the nightstand, grabbed my knife, and with a swift motion, cut the phone cord. Sliding the blade back into its sheath, I stormed out of the room. But before I left, I threw the phone at the bathroom door with such force that it struck with a loud crash, followed by a terrified scream from within. I stepped out into the cool air, taking a deep breath, only to realize I wasn't done yet. I turned and walked toward the next room, knocking firmly on Caleb's door. When it swung open, I landed a solid punch beneath his chin, sending him crumpling to the floor. Diana, her eyes wide with fear, stayed seated on the bed. I checked Caleb's pulse. He was weakening. Without a second thought, I walked to the nightstand, pulled out the phone cord, and turned to face Diana. "If you plan on telling your husband about tonight, tell him I said hello," I said, dripping with sarcasm. "Or maybe I'll tell him myself." With that, I flung the phone across the room and walked out. As I stepped outside, I looked up at the sky and inhaled deeply, feeling the tension in my body start to ease. The voice in my head had gone silent. It was over. It was time to move on. Just as I was heading toward my car, my phone rang. Irritated, I answered it. "Yeah? Patrick, it's Jonathan," came the voice on the other end. "What's happening?" "What's happening?" I asked, my voice flat and uninterested. "Samantha's at the house crying. She says she's scared to go home." I glanced at the clock. Nearly 1 p.m., almost 14 hours since I'd left Rochester Hills. "I don't know what I could have done," I muttered, feeling disoriented. "She says you really hurt Diana's friends last night," Jonathan continued. "Hurt them?" I scoffed. "They're lucky I didn't do more." "What the hell, Patrick? That's not like you." Jonathan's voice was full of disbelief. I paused before asking, "Did Samantha tell you where this happened?" "She said it was outside a restaurant in Rochester Hills." "So she's trying to avoid it?" Jonathan asked, his tone becoming sharper. "With her family history, I suppose that makes sense," I said slowly, sensing Jonathan was beginning to understand what I was saying. "Samantha's your daughter, so I guess that's true. Patrick, I'm bringing Samantha home. We need to talk," Jonathan said, his voice firm. "Sure, no problem," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." He hung up, but I could still hear Samantha in the background, pleading, "No, Dad, no." I sighed. She's not making this easy. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing my second beer and flipping through old photos when Jonathan and Samantha finally arrived. Samantha clung to Jonathan's arm, trying to pull him toward the door. "Dad, please," she pleaded. "Let us talk. Patrick and I need some time alone." Samantha was barefaced, her hair disheveled, eyes swollen from crying, her whole body trembling like a leaf in the wind. She wouldn't look at me, constantly trying to pull Jonathan toward the door. But Jonathan sat down at the table, his eyes darting between me and the knife resting next to my beer bottle. "Okay, Patrick," Jonathan said, his voice taut with frustration. "What's going on?" I glanced at Samantha and, with a hint of sarcasm, said, "Go ahead, Samantha. Tell your dad what's really going on." "Shut up, Patrick," she snapped. "We can work this out." Her tone was commanding, but her fearful eyes betrayed her. The sheer audacity of her thinking this could be fixed, or that she could manipulate me into believing it, only intensified my anger. I was going to be as honest as she was deceitful. I turned to Jonathan and said, "Samantha and her boss, Diana, have a few girlfriends they hang out with when they're out of town. I found out about it," I continued, "and I didn't exactly handle it well. I might have been a little more polite than she deserved." Samantha sighed and sank into a chair, her face falling. Jonathan stared at me, disbelief painted across his features. "No, Patrick." He shook his head. "Samantha wouldn't do that." "I don't believe you." "Enough, Patrick," Jonathan snapped. his voice rising in anger. "You're being cruel." I locked eyes with him, unflinching, before shooting back. "Cruel? You would have seen what I saw last night. Another man's footprints in her hotel room." I said it plainly, without emotion. Jonathan's gaze flickered to Samantha, whose panicked expression told him everything he needed to know. He slumped in his chair, covering his face with his hands, whispering, "Oh, God." Samantha turned pale, her eyes pleading. "Please, Dad," she begged. "Don't tell Mom. We can fix this, can't we? Please, Patrick." I didn't answer. I just kept flipping through the old photographs, letting the weight of those memories sink in. A few minutes later, Jonathan sat up, wiped his eyes, and asked, "What are you going to do, Patrick?" I looked at Samantha, whose tears had not stopped flowing, and thought for a moment before replying, "I never told either of you about Vietnam. Or ripcord." I sighed. Hell, I never even told my therapist about ripcord. I gestured to the pile of photographs on the table. "Isn't it funny, Jonathan? Your generation proudly wears its war medals, while mine hides its memories away in locked shoeboxes." I picked up an old, faded photograph of two young soldiers, their faces illuminated by wide grins, as though they were enjoying a carefree day. Both were dressed in jungle fatigues. I remembered that James and I had arrived at Ripcord in May 1971. It was just another routine assignment: set up camp, provide support for the troops, and then move on. But this time something stopped me. I stared at the image of Jonathan, and there was something about it that felt different. Our post was located on a remote ridge near the Laos border, looking down upon the A Shau Valley. This place was known for its perilous nature to the U.S. military. Previous engagements had severely depleted our forces. Ripcord was set up to support 4 battalions of the 101st Airborne Division, tasked with blocking the North Vietnamese Army, NVA, from pushing south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I couldn't help but shake my head. It seemed almost ridiculous to be here. The base itself consisted of our 155mm artillery battery, a mortar platoon, and an infantry company. There were 2 helicopter pads and several other basic units, totaling around 400 men. Everything we had was underground: bunkers, trenches, tunnels. It wouldn't be until later that we would realize we were surrounded by 12,000 NVA soldiers. I looked back at Jonathan. "Doesn't this remind you of anything, Jonathan? Like the Marines at Chosin Reservoir?" I asked him. Jonathan nodded slowly, lost in thought. After a long pause, I added, "The first few weeks weren't so bad for us. But for those on the combat positions up in the hills, it was pure hell," I went on. "Helicopters were flying in and out all day long from dawn to dusk. We only faced occasional sniper or automatic weapons fire, but the anti-aircraft fire steadily increased." I glanced over at Jonathan again. Then, on July 1st, everything shifted. Just after 7 a.m., the first mortar attack was launched on us, I recalled. Over the next week, the North American Armed Forces fired 20-30 rounds per day from 60 and 81mm mortars. Soon after, they began using 120mm mortars, a new weapon never seen before outside the demilitarized zone. The worst part, I paused, was that you couldn't always hear the shells coming. The wind, the helicopters, and the constant artillery fire made it nearly impossible to detect them, I continued. One day, I was running from the mess hall to the bunker when a mortar went off nearby, knocking me off my feet. I made it to the bunker, and James looked up and said, "Damn, Patrick, you're bleeding." A faint smile crossed my face as I remembered that moment. I'd forgotten my body armor that day, I said, shaking my head. "Never again." I paused for a moment. The shrapnel hit me just below my right shoulder blade. They evacuated me to Camp Evans to remove it. It wasn't too bad, but they kept me there for a few days to monitor a concussion. When I finally made it back to Ripcord, things had worsened. We were now taking 70 to 80 mortar rounds a day. It kept escalating. Mortars, RPGs, recoilless rifle fire. We were losing men daily, and our artillery was firing without pause. We were using so much ammo that the batteries would empty in hours. Chinooks would bring in more shells, all while NVA 51 caliber fire rained down on them. As soon as the ammo was dropped off, we rushed to reload the guns. I stopped, remembering the chaos of it all. During one of those supply runs, I caught another half-dozen shrapnel wounds. Between the non-stop bombardment, our regular duties, and the ammo resupply missions, we were completely drained, I went on. F-4 Phantoms, B-52s, and other aircraft were constantly overhead, bombing the hills. Smoke and tear gas from the NVA hung in the air. And after July 8th, when we first saw enemy soldiers infiltrating our perimeter, we were on edge every night, expecting an attack at any moment. We just didn't know when, I added quietly. The room was heavy with silence, the weight of the memories pressing in. Jonathan's face had darkened, and Samantha seemed to brace herself as I spoke. I took a deep breath. As the shelling wore on, our casualties mounted, I said softly. Morale plunged. We felt utterly abandoned. By the end of it, we had lost over 500 men, dead and wounded. My voice wavered slightly. I was assigned to carry body bags to the helipad for evacuation. On July 18th, the worst possible thing happened, I continued, my voice thickening. A Chinook, carrying howitzer shells, was hit and crashed over a battery and ammo supply point. The explosion was devastating. The battery caught fire, and explosions raged through the base for hours. All 6 of our artillery pieces were destroyed, and dozens of men were badly injured. We rushed to the battery to help. Many of the wounded had severe burns from the aviation fuel. James and I helped carry a machine gunner onto a stretcher. When I grabbed his arm, the skin came off in my hand. The stench of burning flesh is something I'll never forget. Jonathan nodded somberly, his face etched with sorrow. Samantha appeared horrified, her face drained of color as she listened. I wiped my eyes and carried on. We all knew our position was no longer tenable, but the higher-ups didn't care. They saw it as a chance to strike back at the enemy. After all, we had nearly 4 full NVA regiments in one location. A few nights later, I said, my tone turning colder, we were on high alert again. We were under a barrage of automatic gunfire, the rounds ripping through the air and striking the ground all around us. James and I swiftly set up the M60 machine gun in a trench just in front of the FDC bunker, bracing ourselves for an impending assault. The mortar team was firing flares into the sky with relentless precision, while the infantry unleashed gunfire along the edge of the jungle. Every few minutes, artillery ships soared overhead, launching rockets and miniguns at suspected enemy positions. James and I held our fire, staying as still as possible to avoid giving away our position, especially with an infantry squad just 30 yards away from us. I continued, my voice distant as I recalled the madness of that night. The infantry kept advancing from their positions, throwing grenades and spraying automatic gunfire. When we cautiously peeked out, the infantry trench had been completely buried. Without hesitation, we moved to firing positions, and James opened fire as I reloaded the M60. The platoon sergeant crawled over to us, and we quickly briefed him on the situation. He nodded and, ducking low, rushed off to secure more ammunition. I inhaled deeply, forcing myself to carry on with the grim retelling. As we finished the last of the ammo belts, the crack of an M16 rang out. The impact was immediate, like being struck by a baseball bat across my back and legs. I collapsed at the edge of the trench, locking eyes with James. His expression told me everything, even though he couldn't speak. I squeezed his hand tightly. He squeezed back once, then his eyes went dull. I knew then that it was over. A knot of sorrow tightened in my throat. My closest friend, my brother, was gone, and I was left in an abyss of grief. I wiped my tears away, hearing Samantha's quiet sniffles, though I couldn't tell if they were for James or for herself. I took a steadying breath and pressed on. When I looked up, I saw Corporal Tran standing over us, his M16 aimed in our direction. Tran was one of Kit Carson's scouts, a defector from the North Vietnamese forces. He unleashed an entire magazine in our direction. The bullets slammed into me, one striking my back, but the body armor absorbed most of the impact, sparing me from further injury. However, I was left with fractured ribs and a severe concussion. A bullet tore through my thigh, narrowly missing the bone. As the shock began to set in, I struggled to stay conscious, grappling with the realization that James was dead, and I had been shot. I couldn't afford to lose consciousness. I focused on the rage building within me, the urge for vengeance. My fury consumed me, and everything around me blurred into a haze of hatred. Tran saw I was still moving and attempted to fire again, but his clip was empty. I played dead, praying he would believe I was finished. Tran dropped his rifle, leaped over the trench, and started waving a flashlight wildly, shouting in Vietnamese. My hands shook as I remembered the confusion of that moment. Then, a rocket-propelled grenade shot from the jungle, missing us by inches. Tran kept waving the flashlight desperately. In the eerie glow of the flare, I saw 3 figures emerging from the jungle, sappers armed with satchel charges and AK-47s. I could barely muster the strength to stand, but somehow I managed to grab the M60 from beneath James and aimed it at them. I fired 2 long bursts before the ammo belt ran out, and the sappers dropped to the ground. Tran stood frozen, his face a mask of shock, screaming as he spat, reaching for the machete at his side. I remembered that most scouts carried them to navigate the thick jungle. Before I could brace myself, Tran lunged at me. I dropped the M60, grabbed my knife, and struggled to get on top of him. He reached for his machete, but he never got the chance to wield it. My strength waning, I whispered, I don't know how long I sat there, surrounded by the incessant flare lights, explosions, tracer rounds, and the rumbling of howitzers, the air thick with the stench of burning debris and cordite. It felt like a nightmare. My voice grew hoarse as I continued. Ethan, my platoon sergeant, yanked me by one arm, while Lieutenant Dawson grabbed the other. Dawson was shouting at me to get to the bunker. Napalm was coming in, and we were too close to the wire. I paused, taking a sip of beer, my fingers tracing the purple hearts on the table. Jonathan and Samantha sat quietly. I couldn't bring myself to look them in the eye. I continued. That's when I lost consciousness, I said softly. I woke up in a medical bunker with an IV in my arm. A battalion surgeon and corpsman were working on me. Doc said I would likely survive and that they'd evac me at dawn. My voice trembled as I recalled. I was flown out around noon, miraculously. The helicopters were under constant fire, 2 already shot down. Ours took several hits, one of which killed the crew commander. By then, the decision had been made to evacuate Ripcord. I paused, my gaze fixed on the table. They pulled everyone out on the 21st and bombed the place, I added. But I didn't care. 24 hours later, I was on a flight to Japan, then transferred to Walter Reed for a month. I sighed, the memory still fresh. While I was there, some colonel who probably had never even heard of Ripcord handed me a medal for eliminating my enemies. I picked up the silver star from its box and set it beside the purple hearts. It was the same medal Jonathan had displayed on his mantle. I shook my head. The doctors treated me well, but mentally, I wasn't okay. I had nightmares every night. The sounds, the smells, the faces of the dead and the wounded haunted me. I glanced away, my eyes burning. I missed James's funeral, but I went home before reporting to Sil Bass. I visited James's parents. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. They wanted to know about Vietnam, what happened to James, but they never asked a single question, I said, swallowing hard. Why did I survive and he didn't? I whispered. I ask myself that every day. I sat in silence, my mind adrift in an ocean of thoughts that I couldn't quite make sense of. Despite being in therapy, the distance between me and the world felt wider than ever. During my time at Fort Sill, I did just enough to get through the day, drowning myself in college drafting as a way to avoid interacting with anyone. After leaving the Army, I moved back in with my parents and enrolled in school, not because I had any passion for it, but because I felt completely adrift. I glanced over at Samantha. "And then I met you," I whispered. Samantha's gaze dropped to the floor, her voice barely a whisper. "You were the one who brought me back from the brink. You were so full of life, so passionate about everything, and so beautiful, inside and out, everything I thought I couldn't be. You gave me a reason to go on. You showed me what life could truly be," she choked out, her voice wavering. "I fell in love with you. You saved me, and you gave me 3 amazing children. I'll forever be grateful for that." I let out a heavy sigh. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, neither of us moving. Eventually, Jonathan cleared his throat. "What happens now, Patrick?" he asked. I turned toward him, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. "Jonathan," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I've been betrayed twice in my life. Both times, I lost my best friend." Samantha's eyes grew wide, and she began to sob. "No, no, no," she repeated, shaking her head in disbelief. The room fell into an oppressive silence. Samantha's sobs echoed, and both Jonathan and I felt the sting of tears threatening to spill. Jonathan's voice was soft when he spoke again. "Are you sure, Patrick? Are you really going to throw everything away because of one mistake?" Samantha lifted her head, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I knew the truth would destroy everything between us, but I couldn't let the lies persist any longer. I shook my head. "It wasn't just one mistake, Jonathan," I said with finality, my gaze locking onto Samantha. "I found out last night that Samantha's been seeing someone else for almost 2 years, and it wasn't just one person." Samantha gasped, her face drained of all color as she sank back into her chair. I turned to Jonathan, my tone icy and resolute. "Does that answer your question?" I asked. Jonathan stood slowly, sorrow etched across his face as he turned toward Samantha. "You're my daughter, and I should love you. But I can't respect you anymore." His words trailed off, and he shook his head in disbelief. Samantha reached out to him, but he recoiled. Then, turning to me, Jonathan spoke in a firm voice. "Patrick, you don't deserve this. Do what you need to do," he continued, "but don't hurt her." The words felt like a punch to my gut, but I had reached my breaking point. "No, Jonathan," I replied coldly. "I'm past that. But if it makes you feel better, take this." I pulled the knife from my belt and handed it to him. He took it wordlessly, his expression blank as he turned and left. His shoulders were slumped, and I could already sense his dread over how he would explain everything to Evelyn as the door clicked shut behind him. The phone rang, but neither of us moved to answer it. It rang and rang, the sound only amplifying the stillness between us. Eventually, it stopped, and the silence became unbearable. Finally, I broke the quiet. "I thought the police would be here by now, not your father." Samantha flinched, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Diana and I told them we were attacked outside the bar. We hoped they'd stay quiet, so you wouldn't call their wives." I took a moment to absorb what she'd said, and slowly, the realization began to settle in. I was free. Their lies wouldn't hold up. For a fleeting moment, I felt a weight lift from my chest, but then the full impact of everything unraveling around me hit like a ton of bricks. "So where are they now?" I asked, my voice emotionless. Samantha swallowed, shifting nervously in her seat. "They're still in the hospital, under observation. You really hurt them. Jacob's got a broken nose, cheekbone, and ribs. Caleb's got a dislocated jaw, broken teeth, and a concussion." I responded without emotion. "Don't forget their balls, Samantha." Fear flashed across her face. "No, no, you really hurt them." She hesitated before speaking again. I didn't know you were capable of that, Patrick. Did you really have to do that? I stared at her, disbelief in my eyes. You're defending those idiots? I scoffed with a bitter laugh. Before she could reply, the phone rang again. You should answer that, I said, heading toward the bathroom. It's probably for you. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot and swollen, just like how I felt inside. I had spent the night wide awake, and when I returned to the kitchen, Samantha was still staring at the phone. Slowly, she picked it up, then hung it up again, collapsing into a chair. When I sat down, she spoke, her voice distant and drained. Did you really have to tell Diana's husband? I shrugged, indifferent. Why not? He's already called Jacob and Caleb's wives, and he kicked Diana out. She's going to need a lawyer if she wants to see her daughter. Samantha broke down again, tears streaming down her face. Damn it. Damn it all, she sobbed. She looked up at me, voice shaky. She fired me. She said it was all my fault. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. I paused for a brief moment, collecting my thoughts. Samantha, remind me again, who was it that first introduced you to Jacob and Caleb? Wasn't it Diana? She sniffled, looking up at me with a puzzled expression. How did you know? She asked. I gave a cold smile. When I mentioned what you and Diana did last night to Jeremy, he couldn't believe it. He called me a liar and accused me of trying to ruin his marriage. But when I mentioned Jacob Hunter's name, his face went pale, and he began swearing. It was the first time I'd seen him so furious. I took another moment to compose myself. Do you remember years ago when you told me that Diana's second marriage was falling apart and that she had grown distant from her parents? She has a sister upstate as well, someone she doesn't speak to. About a year ago, Jeremy was auditing a company, and that's when he met Sabrina, Diana's sister. They clicked right away, and one evening, Sabrina invited him to dinner with her husband, Derek. Samantha's face drained of color. I continued. Sabrina had quite a revelation. It turns out, Derek was Diana's first husband. She had been having an affair throughout their marriage, and when Derek found out, he kicked her out and filed for divorce. I let the weight of that information settle for a moment. Diana never told Jeremy any of this. And guess who her lover was during her first marriage? Jacob Hunter. Samantha stood frozen, her eyes wide in disbelief. When I mentioned Jacob's name to Jeremy, it all clicked. He realized that Diana had been doing the same thing to him that you've been doing to me. It's no wonder he ended things with her. I took a deep breath, and, like Jeremy, I'm starting to wonder just how long you've been deceiving me, I said, my tone steady. Samantha started crying again. Oh my God, Patrick, it was just Jacob and Caleb during our shopping trips. Please, you have to believe me. I shook my head. I hadn't even considered any of this until Diana brought it up. Before our first shopping trip, she sat there, twirling a handkerchief, crying and begging me. Please, Patrick, I don't know how I ended up here. It's like I woke up from a nightmare, she said. When I walked into the bathroom and saw you there, I didn't say anything. I just gave her a grim look. Encouraged by that, she quickly started to explain. I knew Diana liked to play around, but I didn't think she would hook up with anyone during our trip, she said, biting her lip. Then Jacob showed up at the restaurant. Diana said she knew him from high school, but I didn't buy it. He was charming, flirting with both of us, dancing with me, and complimenting me more than I could count. I had more drinks than usual, and when his hands became too familiar on the dance floor, I pretended not to notice. Later, Diana left with Jacob to the room next to ours. I sighed deeply, the truth hitting me like a wave. I realized then that she had planned the whole thing. The walls were thin, and I could hear them all night. That's why you came back looking like that, right? I stared at her in disgust. Samantha, this is unbelievable. Samantha lowered her head and wiped her eyes. The next morning, Jacob was gone. We had breakfast, and Diana wouldn't stop talking about her night with him. She couldn't stop raving about him on the drive back. A few months later, Diana and I had lunch together a couple of times a week, and she continued to talk about Jacob and how much fun they had. "That's when I first heard about his wart," Samantha murmured. Diana joked that I should try it, but at first I just laughed it off. But the more she talked about it, the more the idea stuck with me. A few months later, during another shopping trip, Diana admitted that Jacob wanted to be with me and she didn't mind. I frowned, feeling sick. I laughed at her, but then I asked, "What would you do if I actually went along with it?" Samantha continued. She said that Jacob had a friend named Caleb who could keep her company. I didn't say no, though I'm not sure why I didn't. I told her I'd think about it, but I wasn't sure I could go through with it. She looked up at me, but I just stared back, my expression unchanged. "I knew it was wrong, Patrick," she said quietly, "but I thought I could do it, and no one would ever find out." Her gaze dropped to the floor. That Saturday night, Jacob and Caleb met us at the restaurant. We had dinner, some drinks, and then went to a nightclub. We split into pairs, and I ended up with Jacob. I had enough to drink by that point, and convinced myself it was fine. Everyone was having a good time. Later, we went back to the motel. Jacob and I went to our room, while Diana and Caleb went to theirs. Samantha went quiet, her gaze fixed on her hands. I finally spoke, my voice thick with disdain. "So, was it everything you expected?" She met my gaze, tears shimmering in her eyes. "It was fine. It wasn't better than what we had, but it was exciting because it was wrong, and I could pretend to be someone else." "You mean it wasn't just fine?" I asked bitterly. "It excited you so much that you completely forgot about your husband at home, the one who does everything for you so you can be alone?" Samantha turned her face away, fighting back tears. "Yes," she whispered. I sneered. "And Caleb, your husband?" Without meeting my eyes, she spoke softly. After Jacob and I slept together a few more times, Diana joked that she was starting to miss him. I didn't think much of it. But the next time we went on a trip, we split into pairs again. I danced with Caleb most of the night. Later, he came to my room, and we spent the night together. At first, it didn't appear to be anything too serious. But after a few more trips, Jacob and Caleb swapped positions in the dead of night. Initially, I didn't notice. It wasn't until I woke up and realized the man lying next to me wasn't the one I had gone to sleep with that it all became clear. Samantha's gaze met mine, filled with grief. In that moment, it felt as if I were living two separate lives, as though I were in two completely distinct realities. I once believed I was satisfied with our life, our family, but those weekends began to weaken me. I tricked myself into thinking I could have it all, without you ever suspecting a thing. How naive I was, so utterly foolish. And then, when you caught me at the motel, I looked into the mirror and saw exactly what I had become, she whispered. I rose from my seat and looked down at her. "Quite a story, Samantha. Too bad it doesn't have a happy ending. Or perhaps it does for you. Tonight I'll be picking up the kids after Amelia's asleep. We'll sit down with Joshua and Jillian and tell them that their parents are separating. I'll keep the details to myself to spare them unnecessary pain. I'll sleep on the couch tonight while I figure out what comes next." Samantha cried out, her voice choked with emotion. "Patrick, please don't do this. I love you. Please, don't leave me." I turned to face her. "Why shouldn't I?" Through her tears, she begged. "It was only a few nights a year. I never saw Jacob or Caleb except for those weekends. Please, Patrick, forgive me. Let me fix this." "Forgive you?" I shook my head. "Forgive you for sneaking around with other men a few nights each year? For giving away the most intimate part of yourself? For breaking my trust and ruining the belief I had that we were meant to be?" I sighed deeply. "And how do you make that right? Can you undo it? Can you promise to never be with Jacob or Caleb again? because that's what it would take to fix this. I scanned the kitchen, our family photos, the children's drawings stuck to the fridge, Amelia's high chair tucked in the corner, all the things that made this place feel like home. I spent most of last night thinking about what life would be like 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. I might be able to forgive you, but I'll never forget. My voice faltered as I continued. Every time I look at you, I'll remember last night. Every time I hear your name or your voice, that's what will come to mind. And Samantha, I just can't live with that. I paused in silence, barely aware of Samantha's body swaying back and forth, her sobs soft and shattered, whispering, "No, please God, no." After a long moment, I spoke in a low, steady voice. "Can you answer one question for me, Samantha?" She lifted her gaze to me, her eyes distant, as though she was awaiting her final sentence. "You've lost the man who loved you more than anyone. You've lost the respect of your parents, my parents, and me. You've lost your job. And someday, you'll have to explain to our children why you tore our family apart. Was it worth it?" The silence lingered, filled only by her sobs. Without saying another word, I turned and walked out the door. That's it for now. But don't turn off the video. Another exciting story is coming right up. It's Thursday, and the pressure's mounting. I've been grinding non-stop, with tomorrow being a make-or-break day for me. The month and the quarter are coming to a close, and my quarterly bonus is hanging by a thread. Yeah, no big deal, right? I'm in sales, specifically office equipment. Need a copier, fax machine, printer, shredder, or even something fancy like a Zoom-friendly desk or trash can? I've got it all. It used to be a solid gig, back when things were more predictable, back before all the chaos. I moved tons of office gear back in the day. Copiers, desks, even massage chairs. The money was good, real good. But now, it's not the same. Some of you might be thinking I must have had a killer run with the work-from-home boom. Surely that worked out well for me, right? Truth is, Amazon and Walmart wiped the floor with me in that market. No kidding, they're the ones who ended up getting my business for my own home office gear. Honestly, I don't even care about the home office market. What really excites me is the traditional office setup, the pre-pandemic world. Remember the old days? Everyone gathered by the coffee pot, hanging out at the water cooler, talking about anything and everything, while burning through reams of paper. Those were the times. And let's not even touch on how tough it's been for the restaurant and opera industries. They've been hit just as hard, haven't they? COVID really threw a wrench in my business. Anyway, today's been one of those days. I've been up since the crack of dawn, fueled by terrible coffee, juggling calls and texts on my iPhone, checking Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Google Maps, and Google Earth, all synced to my car's Bluetooth. It was around 1 p.m. when I messed up my last sales call. You could feel the pressure building, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was running on empty. My stomach was doing flips, queasy from lack of food and all that horrible coffee. But then I saw it. McDonald's, a beacon of hope. I pulled into the drive-thru, and while it wasn't the fastest, the line was moving at a decent pace. They had at least 3 people working. I placed my order and got the jackpot. Fries. No Coke? That's fine. I could deal with a root beer. The line crawled forward as I waited for my meal. I could practically taste those fries, a small win in an otherwise crummy day. When I reached the window, I grabbed my sack and drink, then sped off. It wasn't much of a wait at all. I might even make my next appointment on time. And hey, fries. Life's little victories, right? I zipped out of the parking lot, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic, hitting the intersection, taking a sharp right at the red light, slamming the gas, and heading west. I was on Sandy Boulevard, a busy 4-lane road leading in and out of downtown. Traffic was heavy, but at least it was moving. I wedged my root beer between my legs, grabbed a handful of fries, and then picked up a Big Mac, using my knee to steer while I unwrapped it and shoved it in my mouth. Mid-bite on the second Big Mac, something caught my eye. It was my wife's car. Hard to miss her bright red Lexus. Not many of those around. I watched as she pulled off the road and parked in front of a motel. As I got closer, I saw her get out. My heart sank as I watched her lean in and kiss some guy. I immediately yanked the wheel, crossing against traffic and making a sharp U-turn, tires screeching, root beer spilling, fries flying, and horns blaring. I didn't care. I slammed the gas and fishtailed back toward the motel. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They walked hand in hand through the motel door. No way, no freaking way. I was livid. My hands were pounding on the steering wheel as I slammed into the motel parking lot, blocking her in. I jumped out of the car, but then froze. What was I supposed to do? My mind went completely blank. Okay, I was furious. And you would be too. The disrespect, the audacity, everything hit me all at once. I was stunned, gutted, and in total disbelief. Rage was starting to build up. How could she do this to me? The pain was overwhelming. I found myself sitting on the warm hood of her car, staring at the door she'd just walked through with him. I wasn't handling this well. I leaned over and spat out half-chewed Big Mac and fries. There was no denying what I saw. That kiss wasn't a mistake. Her body language, playful, comfortable, said it all. I had to think. What now? I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. But my brain wasn't cooperating. I needed a plan. I had to have one. But the truth was, I hadn't thought about one. I had no idea what my next move was. This wasn't how I expected the day to go. Damn it all. And here I was, sitting on the hood of her car, staring at that motel door. I looked around and noticed the motel's faded off-white paint. It was a single-story place with parking spaces in front of rooms. Down the way, I saw what looked like the check-in area, with a guy inside gesturing wildly on the phone. I turned my gaze back to room 109. It both drew me in and repelled me in equal measure. Positioned just to the right of room 108's entrance, and to the left of the door to room 110, it lingered in my sight. I couldn't stop wondering who was behind those doors. Were they, like me, hiding their secrets with their own partners? Did I know them? Beside the entrance to room 109, a large window stood with its curtains tightly drawn. The door to room 109 was indistinguishable from the others in the motel, each painted in a pale off-white that was subtly lighter than the building's exterior. A small brass number adorned each door, and the trim around both doors and windows was coated in a deep, dark hue. It wasn't black, but rather a worn, gray shade that mirrored the heaviness inside me. Despite the uniformity, each door seemed to carry its own distinct weight. Behind the one to room 109, she waited. Should I end her life? Yes. But also no. Actually, yes, I did want to. But I couldn't. She was, after all, the mother of my children. But wait, were they even mine? The thought pierced me, a deep ache I couldn't ignore. My left arm burned in pain. That bastard. Sitting was unbearable, so I leaned back against the car's hood, staring up at the vast blue sky above, with the sun glowing brightly and fluffy clouds scattered across it. How could such a stark, ugly day hold so much beauty? I found myself almost absent-mindedly watching a hawk soaring high above, hunting for prey. As it swooped lower, I squinted, realizing it wasn't a hawk at all. The bird circled gracefully, its wings gliding through the sky. I saw clearly now it was a buzzard, scavenging the road. Somehow, that brought me some comfort. A buzzard felt much more fitting for such an open, grand sky. I, too, felt like roadkill. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my daughter, calling via FaceTime. She was at her future in-laws' house. They were busy preparing for her wedding, and my wife and I were supposed to join them for dinner soon to discuss the seating arrangements. Dad. Hey, are you okay? We had been talking about the father-daughter dance. Dad? Dad, are you all right? My daughter sensed something was wrong immediately. Dad? You're scaring me. Should I call 911? Where are you? Dad? Her voice grew more frantic, filled with concern. Jason, honey, something's wrong with my dad. I heard my future son-in-law's worried voice. What's going on, Daddy? My daughter screamed, her face twisted in fear. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry, I managed to say, my voice faltering. I paused, unable to hold back the tears, and they spilled over, streaming down my face in front of my daughter, humiliating me. So much for maintaining the strong, invincible father facade. I turned the phone around, holding it in front of me, and aimed the camera at the door of room 109. I slid off the car hood, feeling the momentum push me forward with every step. With each stride, I moved closer. One more step, and my foot slammed into the door. The wood splintered with a sharp crack, shards flying, pieces of the door and frame scattering across the room. The darkness within the room was shattered by the sudden rush of light. I stormed in, 2 steps into the room, holding the phone out in front of me, its camera capturing the scene. The king-sized bed, where they were caught in the act. The sunlight poured in from behind, illuminating their actions in the dingy, run-down motel room. Eleanor was on top, moving rhythmically, her body slamming down onto the part of the bed that wasn't mine. Her chest bounced wildly, like the wings of a bird in flight. As she turned her head, her eyes caught sight of the door crashing open, the sunlight flooding in. She looked over her shoulder, squinting against the light, her hair bouncing with each motion. Then, her expression shifted. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Her face went from lust to recognition, then back to lust, followed by shock and finally, fear. And the bastard, he was about to climax, staring right at me. Are you kidding me? In that moment, I seriously reconsidered the idea of not killing her. I could hear my daughter screaming through the phone, "Mother!" I held the phone steady, tears blurring my vision, recording the horrifying scene. A wave of nausea swept over me. Then it hit. I vomited, the contents splattering on the floor beside the bed. The screams from my phone grew louder as they, too, witnessed my wife's peak of pleasure. I kept the phone aimed at them, capturing every moment as her eyes rolled back in ecstasy. She gasped for breath, her body frozen in the aftershocks. Finally, her eyes fluttered open again, her breath coming in sharp, heavy gasps. The haze of lust slowly started to lift from her. Then, in full view of us all, she dismounted. My wife stepped off the bed, right into the sickening, still-warm mess I had just expelled. She looked down at the mess, then back up at the phone. Her attention shifted, her brow furrowing as she tried to make sense of what was on the screen. Her blue eyes grew wide with shock. Her face turned ashen, draining of all color until it was an unnatural, ghostly white. The world around her seemed to freeze in place, as though time itself had paused. A heavy silence enveloped the room, oppressive and almost suffocating, leaving only the eerie stillness. For the first time since the call had started, no sound came from the other side. It felt as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something momentous to occur. Then, without warning, Eleanor's mouth opened wide, unleashing a piercing, blood-curdling scream. She rushed toward the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind her, leaving me in the motel room alone with him. I advanced, carefully sidestepping the mess I had made, and thrust my iPhone into his face, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Who the hell do you think you are?" I yelled, my voice laced with fury. "Why don't you tell her daughter who you really are?" Spittle flew from my mouth as my face twisted in rage. All I could think of was making him suffer, even if it meant ruining him forever. Let him pay, I thought. His mouth moved, but no words came out. His scent, part fear, part something disturbingly familiar, hung in the air, suffocating me. I could almost picture the fear that must have gripped him, standing there, a 210-pound man with a face contorted in anger, a fist clenched in rage, while an iPhone was shoved into his face and a group of people screamed at him through the screen. It was a moment that made it clear to anyone in his shoes that they were in very deep trouble. "I'm about to send you flying into next year," I muttered, my voice low and threatening, and with that, I slapped him, Hard. Again, even harder, and once more, the force of it ringing in the air. My frustration boiled over and I growled, "Enough of this." I grabbed him by the ear and yanked him off the bed, forcing his naked body to kneel in the mess I had left behind. His knees scraped painfully across the filthy carpet, struggling to avoid the rough friction. He fought to keep pace with me as I tightened my grip on his ear, dragging him out of the ruined doorway of room 109. I released his ear and stepped back, seething. "You worthless piece of—" I put all my strength into the kick, my sharp black wingtip smashing into his backside with brutal force. He recoiled in pain, curling up on the sidewalk, hands pressed against his rear, blood leaking between his fingers as he cried like a child. Too bad for him, I thought bitterly. I turned back toward the room, heading for the bathroom door where Eleanor was hiding. "Please, don't break the door. Please don't," I heard her pleading from the other side. "Wait." A voice from behind stopped me, and I turned to see him holding out a key. I raised my iPhone in response. His name tag read Ned. He was the guy I had noticed earlier in the office. From my phone screen, I could see the chaos on the other end of the line, and I knew he could hear the mixture of crying, shouting, cursing, and even strained laughter filtering through from the other side. His face showed the strain. He winced as he looked at me. Without a word, I took the key from him, turned, and continued toward the bathroom door, keeping the phone in front of me. But just then, the door burst open, and the cops piled into the room, tackling me to the bed. The weight of them knocked the air out of me. My focus was still fixed on the bathroom door, and I never saw them coming. "Stop resisting!" they shouted as they pressed me into the bed, twisting my wrist just enough so I could still see my daughter's face on the screen. "I love you," I whispered, mouthing the words. Her face, full of terror, blurred as everything around me started to fade to gray. Time lost all meaning as I sat there, trapped in that room for what felt like hours. But strangely, I felt calm, despite the storm inside me. I could only reflect on what had happened. The room was dreary, a place devoid of comfort. A half wall of one-way mirror stretched across from me, while the rest of the space was an endless gray. A single bulb hung overhead, casting a weak glow over a small gray table. I sat in a cold, uncomfortable metal chair, shifting uncomfortably, unable to find any way to ease the discomfort. My thoughts wandered to my sales goals, which now seemed entirely out of reach. The half-finished fries I had abandoned earlier felt like a distant, meaningless memory. I felt a deep sense of self-pity. The doorknob was scuffed, its twisted state mirroring my life's current disarray. Just then, the door swung open, and 2 officers stepped inside. They took seats across from me, pulling out chairs. The taller of the 2 began speaking. "All right, Bob," he said, pausing to check his notes. "Let's take care of the easy stuff first. The motel owner—" He glanced at his paper. "Ned is willing to drop the complaint if you pay for the damages within 24 hours. I nodded in acknowledgement. "Next," he continued, "your car's at the impound. I suggest you pick it up soon. They charge by the hour." The officer looked up, meeting my gaze. His eyes were cold as ice. "Now, about the assault and battery charge against—" "Harold Rancid," he said, flipping through his notes. "Wait, did you play soccer?" The question took me by complete surprise. "No," I replied. "But you might want to give it some thought. There could be something in it for you down the line. Your shoe, quite literally, found its way into Mr. Rancid's backside. He's still in surgery. Mr. Rancid's rear end had to be removed, fixed, and then reattached. It looks like he might even require an entirely new posterior. The damage to Rancid's backside was as unpleasant as it sounds. The medical team is carefully working to extract and reconstruct his rear end as we speak. If it doesn't make it, you might be facing charges for rear-end homicide." The taller, less attractive cop had to take a moment, clearly struggling to hold back his laughter. He was laughing so hard that tears were streaming down his face. At the same time, the more attractive female officer was also in stitches, slapping the gray table in front of her. After some time, they both managed to regain their composure, wiping their eyes. "Listen, Bob," the female officer said. "Just pay for the motel door. It's going to be around $375. You're the third husband to break a door there this week. As for Mr. Rancid, let's just say you're not the first husband to get a kick in the rear, but you're definitely the first to kick it in such a way." She burst into laughter again, her hands slapping the desk once more. The male cop wiped his eyes again. Then he spoke. "You don't have a criminal record, so we're going to let you go on your own recognizance. We understand you're under a lot of stress and kind of snapped. Your daughter's agreed to keep an eye on you. Look, we don't need to deal with more paperwork. Just stay out of trouble. Keep your nose clean, and the next time we meet, you might not walk out of here. Got it?" I just nodded. It seemed like the right thing to do. "On your way out, they'll schedule your court date. Get yourself a lawyer and make sure you show up." An hour later, I walked out of the police station with a court date in hand and a card from the female officer, Detective Sandy Heat. Her cell number was written on the back. The wedding party was waiting for me outside. Well, everyone except my wife. They drove me to the impound lot to get my car. The drive there was completely silent. What do you even say in a situation like this? Nice weather didn't seem appropriate. They waited for me while I paid the fees and retrieved my car, then followed me back home. It took the police about an hour to release Bob's wife, Eleanor. Though she was visibly shaken, she didn't need medical attention. And while what she did wasn't exactly classy, it wasn't illegal, so they didn't arrest her. It could have gone faster, but it took the officers nearly 35 minutes to coax Eleanor out of the bathroom, and they also had to tow Bob's car. Eleanor had been terrified by Bob's sudden, violent entry. She thought he might either kill her or make her life unbearable before finally killing her. The rage she saw in his eyes was like nothing she'd ever known. In her panic, Eleanor left the motel and went straight to the bank. She withdrew as much as she could, hitting the maximum limits on all her cards. Then she headed home, determined to take whatever valuable items would fit in her car. She piled her best shoes onto the passenger seat before driving away from the driveway. It was already dusk. She saw her daughter's car turn onto the street and immediately swerved, heading in the opposite direction. Bob and the rest of the wedding party arrived shortly after, unaware of Eleanor's departure. As they entered the house, Bob, already in shock, was further devastated by the sight of their ransacked home. They called the police. It was clear that they had been robbed. Bob was completely lost. Nothing made sense. Who was Eleanor? Where was she? Why had she done this? "I don't know," he said. "Nobody knows." His children were just as confused. The in-laws had no idea what to say. No one knew whether they should stay or leave. Bob had no answers for them either. Eventually, they all decided to leave. And so, Bob was left alone. Hour after hour, time seemed to stretch on endlessly. I could feel myself slipping. My mind was in a fog, unable to make sense of anything. My emotions had shut down long ago. I hadn't eaten in days, and hunger didn't even cross my mind. Everywhere I looked, there was pain. The things she took, the emptiness left in their place, it all hurt. And the things she left behind felt like daggers, each one a reminder of what was lost. It seemed like she cared so little for things I thought she valued. The house was eerily silent. The silence was deafening. Everywhere the absence of life, my life, any life, echoed in the rooms. I finished the last of the whiskey, tossing the bottle aside. I crawled up the stairs. I heaved at the peak, feeling my strength drain with each step. Reluctantly, I pressed forward, pushing myself until I finally collapsed into the solace of my bed. Our bed. The hall clock chimed twice, shattering the quiet. What an ungodly time it was. The oppressive darkness of night enveloped me, pressing in from every direction. My vision was useless, but the incessant ticking and talking of the clock filled the stillness. I could almost feel the dark weight of the night seeping into me, the pressure of it closing in. I lay there, unmoving, waiting. Tick. Tock. In a desperate attempt to escape, I pulled the blankets over my head. Will this night never end? My mind was a whirlwind of pain and regret. What had I done? Why did it all have to happen? Oh God, why? The memory of how she looked at me when everything was still fresh is burned into my mind. I could feel the tears wetting the sheets beneath me. As the night dragged on, Bob sank deeper into his own misery, drowning in a swamp of regret and painful realizations. The lessons he had always avoided, the truths he had never wanted to face, everything mixing together in a haze of shame. He fought with the haunting questions of his true identity, clinging desperately to whatever hope he had left for the morning light. Alone in his suffering, Bob was left with no choice but to endure the seemingly endless stretch of the suffocating night. Tomorrow seemed like a distant dream, unreal and meaningless. But when the sun finally rose, Bob would face the coming day with no other option, simply to endure. Meanwhile, far to the east, Eleanor sped down the highway, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The sudden jolt of the rumble strip yanked her focus back to the road. She had been driving recklessly since leaving her home. The miles passed in a blur, her mind a tangle of thoughts. She was trapped in her own head, replaying the most intimate moments of her life over and over. The forbidden love, her husband's confused gaze, the chaos of her daughter's screams, the rawness of a lover's touch, the unsettling faces of her future in-laws, the dingy motel room, the sound of the crashing door, that damn iPhone screen, the crushing guilt, the lingering desire, each memory twisted into an emotional knot that seemed impossible to untangle. Eleanor wasn't trying to reach any destination. She wasn't going anywhere. She was simply running, lost in the chaos of her thoughts. The rumble strip jolted her back to reality once more. With a sharp turn of the wheel, she corrected her course, but her mind spiraled again into the endless loop of guilt and shame. God, the shame. The embarrassment threatened to suffocate her. No one was supposed to know. Her daughter's anguished face, her own cries, they replayed in her mind, over and over again. Again, the rumble strip jolted her back to the present. Then, a deer appeared, dashing across the road, trying to escape her speeding car. The collision, sudden and brutal, ripped through the fog of her thoughts. 6 months have passed since that Thursday, the day my world shattered like the door to room 109. The divorce was finalized last week. It happened faster than I had anticipated. Eleanor never contested anything. She agreed to let me keep the house, the remnants of our bank accounts, and the broken fragments of our life together. Her lawyer showed up, but Eleanor didn't. The pieces of my life slowly shifted, rearranging into something that resembled normalcy, at least from the outside. My daughter got married recently, in a quiet ceremony with only family present. Her brother walked her down the aisle. I sat in the front row, trying to smile, but I couldn't. Still, I was there. Detective Sandy Heat checked in on me a few times. We shared coffee, dinner, and breakfast. She's a good person, quiet, a better listener than talker. She told me I was handling things better than most would in my position. I'm not sure that's true. Harold Rancid recovered, in his own way. He got a new rear end, more or less. His lawyer sent me a settlement offer, and I paid it. My daughter said it was worth every penny. She still hasn't forgiven her mother. She tells me she never will. I tell her forgiveness isn't for Eleanor, it's for her. But she's not ready for that yet. The video from the wedding reception went viral. Someone captured that FaceTime call. The view count hit 30 million the last time I checked. Cheating wife caught live on FaceTime, they called it. My face was blurred out, but hers wasn't. The internet can be cruel like that. I'm still selling office equipment. I barely met my numbers last quarter. My boss gave me some leeway after the video made the rounds. He called me a legend. I don't feel like a legend. I feel like a man who flinches every time he sees a fire engine red Lexus. Eleanor's car was found in a ditch 2 states away, completely totaled. The deer had gone straight through the windshield. She survived, but just barely. She spent weeks in the hospital, followed by months of rehab, before being transferred to a facility in Arizona. Her sister calls occasionally with updates. I listen, say nothing, then hang up. That motel still stands, off the main road. Its off-white exterior, dark trim, and row of doors are unchanged. Sometimes, I drive by. I can't help it. The door to room 109 is new now, standing out among the others. It's a glaring reminder of everything that happened there. I haven't had a full night's sleep since. I find myself waking at exactly 2 a.m. every single day, without exception. The sound of the clock in the hallway ringing out fills the stillness of the night, each chime piercing through the quiet. I can't help but wonder whether the darkness that slowly invades my space will ever stop its unyielding march forward. Detective Heat, Sandy, assures me that it will. She believes that one day I'll wake up, and the first thought to cross my mind won't be about Eleanor in room 109. She says that one day my thoughts will turn to something as mundane as coffee, work, or even her. She reminds me that healing is never a straight path. It's erratic. It moves unpredictably, sometimes forward, sometimes back, and sometimes sideways. She insists that I am making progress, even on the days when it feels like nothing has changed. I try to take things one step at a time, though I'm not entirely convinced that's the right approach. What I do know, however, is this. The fries at McDonald's taste like fries again. It may seem trivial, but it feels like a small victory. Oh, and that hawk I saw? Turns out, it wasn't the buzzard I initially mistook it for. It was a hawk, gliding effortlessly through the air, soaring in search of its next meal. As for me, I'm simply searching for the days ahead. I'm looking for tomorrow, and the one after that. It's Sunday, and I'm still here. Our story has come to an end. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the way I tell stories, head over to my channel and check out my other videos. May the force be with you. See you soon, my friend.